It's April 2024 and I'm deep below the streets of the French city of Reims amongst millions of litres of vintage champagne. Located in northeastern France on the northern edge of the Champagne wine region, the city of Reims has a history dating back to at least 80 BC and over the millennia has been the capital for the Remy Gallic tribe, a major city in the Roman Empire, and served as the key ceremonial location in the history of the French monarch, acting as the traditional site of the coronation of the kings of France. Today, it's an important city for the champagne trade, with millions of litres of France's most famous sparkling wine maturing and developing in the caves and cellars of multiple champagne houses that are headquartered in the city, including Taittinger, Mumm, Martel, Larson and the Clicquot. Before the Roman conquest of Gaul under Julius Caesar, the area of modern-day Reims was already the capital of the Gallic Remy tribe. The tribe allied themselves with the Romans and were consequently rewarded for their loyalty to the empire with special favours from the imperial power, with Remy's capital becoming the major Roman city. At around 600 hectares in size, Reims was the second largest city in the empire, with only Rome itself being larger. During the height of the Roman Empire, the city was home to around 50,000 people, though some estimates put that number closer to 100,000, a figure not again achieved until the 1890s. Even today, the population of France's 12th largest city is still only around the 180,000 mark. With the retreat of the Roman Empire, the fortunes of Reims rapidly declined, with the city being captured by the Vandals in 406 and then burnt to the ground in 451 by Attila the Hun. However, the city wouldn't be down for long, and its longest-lasting role was established in 496 when Clovis, the first king to unite the Franks, was baptised by the Bishop of Reims in the city. The events of the baptism of Clovis became incorporated into the symbols used by the French monarch to claim their divine right to rule. From the anointing of Philippe II Augustus in 1179, prior to his reign from 1180 to 1223, virtually every French king, with only a few exceptions, through to Charles X in 1825 were anointed in the city, with most of these taking place in the cathedral following its completion in the 13th century. From the 12th century onwards, the city developed principally as a centre of textile production, but also as a centre for trade. The city gained its university in 1548, when the Cardinal of Lorraine created the University of Reims. Despite the crippling effects of an outbreak of plague in 1635, the economy of the city continued to grow, and from the 17th century onwards, the construction of new public buildings began. This included the construction of the Hôtel de Ville, with the first stones being laid in 1627 and construction of the first part of the building being completed quickly, allowing council meetings to take place inside the building from 1628. The front facade was completed in 1636, though construction of the building wasn't totally completed until 1823, when the final corner tower was constructed. Sadly, the original building burnt down on the 3rd of March 1917 during the First World War, so the current building is mostly a post-war rebuild from 1924, though keeping close to the original designs of the building. The newly restored town hall was opened by the French president in 1928, 300 years after the first council meetings had taken place inside the original building. Along with the town hall, German bombardment in the First World War also ruined the cathedral. Images of the ruins, along with those of the Ypres Cloth Hall and the University Library in Louvain, being used as anti-German propaganda and evidence of German aggression in the war deliberately targeting cultural landmarks. Repair works on the cathedral took over 100 years, with works only finally being completed in 2019. The city suffered further damage during World War II, but it was in Reims at 2:41 on the morning of the 7th of May 1945 that General Eisenhower and the Allies received the unconditional surrender of the German Wehrmacht, with General Jodl, the German Chief of Staff, signing the surrender of the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, which were located in Reims from February 1945, when they moved from Versailles, until just 19 days later, when they moved forward to Frankfurt. The city is layered with evidence of its history, and despite the destruction of 2 world wars, Reims has managed to retain a reasonable amount of its historic past, the most obvious and visible element of that being the Roman Porte de Mars, the only survivor of 4 city gates that mark the entrance to the city from the north, south, east and west. Archaeological work on the monument in recent years have managed to date it to the period between 200 and 225, At 32 metres long and 13 metres high, the monument is the largest arch in the Roman world. The arch only survived because the walls of the Archbishop's castle were built around it in the 13th century. When the city ramparts were being demolished in 1840, there was a campaign to retain and restore the arch. A short distance away and close to the very centre of both the Roman and modern city, in what would have been the Roman Forum, another small remnant of that era remains in the Cryptoporticus. This underground warehouse and gallery would have formed part of the original Roman Forum, likely the northern part, and was built around the year 100 and lasted until the whole area was destroyed in the raids of the Vandals and Attila the Hun. The structure lay undiscovered for over 1,500 years. In 1922, works began to demolish the 1840 built covered halls, built on the market square, and in the process the remains were uncovered, though little was done with the site for another 60 years until conservation work was undertaken in 1982, repairing and restoring the vaults, enabling them to be opened for public in 1983. These days, the Cryptoporticus is open to the public during the summer months and used as a venue for exhibitions, which is how I was able to look around it in early April when it should have been closed. Dating back almost as far, around the year 250, the first Christian church was founded in Reims as the Roman Empire was adopting Christianity as its religion. That first church moved location at the beginning of the 5th century to a spot previously occupied by a Gallo-Roman bath that, 1600 years later, is still occupied by a religious institution, the Cathedral Notre Dame de Reims. The original church would have been around 20 by 55 metres. In part, this is known as during archaeological excavations in the 1990s, parts of the baptistry of the original church were uncovered directly underneath the current cathedral building. The original cathedral first came to prominence with the baptism of Clovis, the first king of the Franks, in 496. The bishop who baptised him, Remigius, still resides in the city, with his relics held in the medieval Basilica of Saint-Remy. Scroll forward more than 300 years and the coronation of Louis the Pious, the son of Charlemagne, revealed that the cathedral just wasn't big enough any longer for the role it was serving and was in pretty poor condition. A couple of years later, building work started on a newer, bigger cathedral on the same site, with stone being recycled from old city ramparts. The new church was completed by 862, with the expansion adding around 30 metres to the length. But just 100 years later, the space was once again considered too small and further enlargement works are undertaken. Piecemeal expansions were proving to still not be enough, and by the early 12th century the cathedral was once again considered too small for the ambitions of the local archbishops, so they started on a major rebuild with plans to extend the size of the cathedral at both ends. However, on the 6th of May 1210, the cathedral was destroyed by fire, allegedly due to carelessness. Exactly 1 year to the day the cathedral was destroyed, the first stone of a new, bigger, better cathedral was laid. Work on the cathedral moved at exceptional speed, as Reims Cathedral was one of the first buildings to use stones and other materials of standardised size, so each stone could be slotted next to its neighbour without the need to individually measure and cut each stone. 10 years after construction work started, the chapel at the east end of the cathedral entered use, and by 1230 work was underway on the west front, which would have meant that the nave was either complete or almost complete at that point. The structural work on the cathedral was completed by 1275, though it took several centuries more to complete all of the finer decoration, both internally and externally. Following the Battle of Agincourt on the 25th of October 1415, most of northern France, including Reims, fell to the English, who held the city and the cathedral until 1429, when it was captured by Joan of Arc. This allowed the Dauphin to be crowned King Charles VII on the 17th of July 1429. This marked a turning point in the Hundred Years' War, and consequently there are 2 statues to Joan in the cathedral. 1775 saw the penultimate coronation of the cathedral, with Louis XVI being crowned King of France. The end of his reign would come very publicly at the hands of Madame Guillotine. In 1793, during the French Revolution, the cathedral was closed and turned into a grain storehouse. Due to its connection to the coronation of French kings, a lot of damage was done to the statues and grand portal of the building to remove any symbols of royalty. The cathedral returned to its historic role one final time when, in 1825, after the downfall of Napoleon, Charles X was crowned there. But his was the last coronation of the city, with his successor Louis-Philippe I being sworn in as a constitutional monarch in the Parliament in Paris. 1797 saw the penultimate coronation of the cathedral, with Louis XVI being crowned King of France. 1803 saw the penultimate coronation of the cathedral, with Louis-Philippe I sworn in as a constitutional monarch in the Parliament in Paris. The cathedral underwent a series of restoration projects in the 19th century, and almost as though I'm stalking him, in 1860 Eugene Viollet-le-Duc, fresh from his restoration of the medieval walls at Carcassonne, undertook works in the cathedral to return the choir and apse closer to their original medieval appearance. At the outbreak of World War I, the cathedral was commissioned as a hospital, and troops and arms were removed from its immediate vicinity, though that didn't stop the Imperial German Army indiscriminately shelling the city. On the 19th of September 1914, during a prolonged bombardment, shells struck the forest of wooden timbers under the lead-covered roof, setting it on fire and completely destroying it. The bells in the towers melted, windows were blown out, the walls were damaged, and the lead in the roofing melted and started to pour out the mouths of the stone gargoyles. Individual shells continued to hit the cathedral throughout the remaining years of the war, despite repeated pleas from the Pope for the Germans to avoid hitting the building. After the war, there was an original plan to keep the building in its damaged state as a monument to the victims of the war, but in the end it was decided to rebuild the cathedral, with the building reopening for worship in 1938, though restoration and rebuilding works continued through the rest of the 20th and into the 21st century. From the early 17th century onwards, there are plans to build a network of canals throughout the east and north of France, bypassing Paris to create better transport links. Whilst most of the network never came to fruition, one important connection linking the Reims and Marne was completed. The imaginatively titled Canal de la Reims de la Marne, or the Reims-Marne Canal, was built between 1841 and 1866, running for 58 kilometres between the two rivers and through the heart of Reims. The route rises through 16 locks with a gain of 40 metres between Reims and on through Reims, with the city being home to locks 10, 11 and 12, before passing through the 2.3 kilometre long Tunnel de Mont de Billy of a watershed and then descending back down 23.8 metres through 8 locks to the Marne. Today, the canal only sees limited freight traffic and is mostly used for leisure purposes, with the towpath now a popular spot for walking, running and cycling. In addition to the canal, the city is blessed with many green spaces, the largest of which, the promenades, greet you as soon as you set out from the station. Running nearly a kilometre from the Roman stone Porte de Mars at the top end of the Hood Promenade to the 18th century wrought iron gates, the Porte de Paris at the bottom end of the Basses Promenades, with Square Colbert and the statue to local boy turned statesman Jean-Baptiste Colbert located in the centre. To the southwest of the Basses Promenades is the Jardin de Horticulture Pierre Schneiter. These pleasant gardens include a small lake, wooded glades, a water cascade, lawns and general flower beds, which in early April were filled with tulips in almost every shade imaginable. The opposite side of the road to the Jardin is the Square de la Cathedral, another tranquil green space with a large duck pond, water fountains, bandstands and statues. But perhaps the greatest influence on the city today is not so much what's on display above ground, but what's hidden away deep beneath the streets, parks, squares and hills of the city. Lying at the northern edge of the Champagne region, the city plays an important role in the creation of France's most famous drink. Several of the champagne houses have their main headquarters in the city, and beneath them in caves and cellars are millions of bottles of good stuff slowly maturing. Most of the champagne houses run tours down into the cellars where you can see how the wine is matured, the bubbles created, and the care taken to make sure this most status symbol of drinks keeps its prestige. I visited the house of G.H. Mumm, most famous for their Cordon Rouge bottles with a wide red ribbon motif across the bottle, mostly seen being sprayed over F1 drivers between 2000 and 2015. The tour starts in the upper levels of the caves with a brief overview of where the grapes are grown, all local to the Reims area, and crushed before the juice is brought to the building we're in to start the process of maturing into champagne. Today, the raw liquid is stored in vast stainless steel vats, but the first stop of the tour is to look at the giant wooden and later concrete vats which were originally used, keeping the juice from different vineyards separate until it was time to blend them together. The tour then takes you through the various stages of mixing the different juices to ensure a consistent flavour, and then the bottling and laying down. From here you descend down into the lower levels of the cellars, where the rooms and corridors appear to stretch on forever with bottles in special racks to help with the cultivation of the wine. The tour ends in the small G.H. Mumm Champagne Museum, which houses examples of equipment used in the winemaking process through the centuries. And, of course, no tour to a champagne house would be complete without a chance to sample the product. Reims is located 130 kilometres northeast of Paris and is connected by regular high-speed TGV services, taking around 45 minutes between Paris Gare de l'Est and Reims Gare. Additional services run to Champagne-Ardenne TGV station on the edge of town, from where trams run regularly into the centre of Reims. It's also possible to take TER services from Paris to Reims with a change in Epernay, though these take over 2 hours. Paris Gare de l'Est is a short walk from Paris Gare du Nord for high-speed Eurostar services to London, and Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport is one of Europe's key hubs with flights across the globe.